somebody sent information to the former chief directly. Somebody wrote, "I lay awake tonight as I read Twitter posts from the extreme right vowing attacks on Rideau Hall this weekend. Some are calling for action akin to the happenings in Washington on Capitol Hill. I understand the right to peaceful protest, but I'm writing as a very concerned citizen, as we're not hearing any reassurances from the city or policing regarding the safety of residents surrounding these vulnerable and targeted spots."
There was national security representatives, including CSIS and the RCMP, in our joint intelligence group. So again, this was information that was taken in, assessed, evaluated, put towards our threat assessment, and ultimately this didn't bear out to be accurate. There was no threats made against Rideau Hall. Nobody had ever experienced this group coming into an area. Ottawa on the 28th of January was the first experience in that. So I do know that following this, there has been extensive changes internally, and people have seen a definitive change in our response based on our experience. But across the country, police leaders identified that they now had a scope of what their experience could anticipate it to be with this group. Before they arrived on the 28th, we had no experience, and all of the experience as they moved across was that they were lawful and that they indicated they were coming to lawfully protest in Ottawa. That experience package changed for us on the 28th. Chief Slowly, as this meeting went on, expressed reservations about the reasons for which the OPP were present. He identified that he had concerns with them about a couple of things. One of them was about the recording of numbers of OPP members that had been provided to us. And another one was whether they were here to help or to assess and potentially overtake us, was my impression. It was a contentious meeting that did not, I don't believe, formed a good start first meeting in what I believe needed to be a very strong partnership.
Chief Slowly told Interim Chief Bell that he needed more details on Superintendent Bernier's plan so he could decide whether to approve it. Now, do you have any concern about the former chief expressing the need to approve the event commander's plan?
So it is not typical in incident command structures. The strategic level doesn't approve operational level plans.
Chief Slowly and Superintendent Patterson wanted to obtain quick wins. Unless PLT could convince the protesters to leave, they saw no room to negotiate and preferred utilizing enforcement. Interim Chief Bell explained that because of these different perspectives, there was often no agreement on how much negotiation should occur before OPS launched an enforcement operation. Now, does this paragraph accurately describe the tension within the OPS?
Yes. In relation to the utilization of PLT.
That's right, that's right.
Yes.
There's a bit of an internet problem. It's not here, it's the service provider, which means that we don't control it. We're working on trying to get it going. Yeah. We can delay. I'm looking for a consensus or a response. I obviously don't mind because it doesn't affect me. So that's what I'm canvassing. If you could, I'm told you have to introduce yourselves because they're having trouble in the transcripts when there's an objection.
There's no objection. Sir Brendan Miller for Freedom Corp. I can advise that the other internet connection works. It's LAC, guests, back, invites, fully works. It's just not the one that we typically use.
Very creative. Obviously, there's a lot of organization in the convoy organizers.
When did you notify Superintendent Bernier for the first time that these negotiations were going on?
So I believe that, I don't believe that I was the one that notified him. At the meeting on the 12th, As I indicated, we were told through the city and through the chief that these negotiations were highly confidential and that they shouldn't be shared. So I don't believe it was shared until the 13th with Superintendent Bernier.
Right. Now, I understand the sensitive nature of these discussions, but wouldn't you agree that if anyone needed to know, it would have been the one responsible and had the authority for the overall plan, right? And that would have been Superintendent Bernier at that time.
I would absolutely agree that we could have handled that notification better, and it should have been done earlier.
The Black Lives Matter protests that occurred in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd in custody.
That was a major demonstration that we managed, and I have no recollection of any challenges within our command structure.
And to the extent that when we came to this unprecedented protest here brought about as in the convoy, that Chief Slowly and probably others were facing unprecedented circumstances that strained the ICS system as well.
Yes. So unprecedented circumstances, immense levels of stress, very clear expectations on outcomes, and all of those together did strain the ICS system, and actually for me identified that there needs to be much better clarity, at least within the Ottawa Police Service, around how that system manages. That's exactly why when I took over as interim chief, I spent time making sure that everyone understood their role within the ICS system.
Right.
And I've heard you mention a number of times today the behavior that was not anticipated was the behavior of the protesters in relation to the community, the actions vis-a-vis the community. Just to clarify for the record, what are the behaviors that were unanticipated?
So the general dynamics of what our community and ourselves were experiencing in that location. It included honking of horns incessantly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The idling of the vehicles, much of the engagements that we saw between our community members and members of the protest, whether it be intimidating, hate or biased crime behavior, assaultive behavior, the feeling that people were trapped within their residence, within the place that they live and couldn't move around unfettered. It was almost constant conflict between the members of this community and people that were occupying our streets.
It's anticipated that our witnesses are going to say that the day after that announcement on February 9th is when workers from Child and Family Services started to intervene with the protest. Do you agree with that?
No, I wouldn't, because I don't believe that the Children's Aid Society of Ottawa ever directly engaged or intervened in the protest. What I do understand is that we set up mechanisms in order to be able to, in the event that there was an enforcement action and children needed to be removed and then reunited with family, we set up the processes that would be put in place for that.
But that was at the enforcement stage, as I understand it. You had set up, from my review of the records, an empty gymnasium of some kind to take children to, and then the plan was to give them back to their parents. That was what you're thinking of, is that right?
So I didn't develop that specific plan, so you'll need to ask the planning team what the specific plan was.
Okay. So you're going to hear evidence eventually from some of the protesters when they eventually testify that some of the ones that were arrested, upon their release, they were essentially kidnapped by OPS officers, driven out of town in the middle of February winter by OPS officers, and left in various rural areas and parking lots outside of town with no shelter or resources. Are you aware of that?
No, because I don't know the specifics of what they're speaking about. What I do know is that we, as part of our planning, and Inspector Lucas tomorrow will be able to provide more details, but we did have remote arrest processing sites, not in rural Ottawa, in the south end of Ottawa, in a residential mixed commercial area where they were processed and then released to be able to find transportation to wherever they needed to go, which is common with the police.
Right. So one of the areas, there was several, as I understand. One of them was a municipal parking lot where the trucks were being towed to.
That's correct. That's
Right.
in the south end.
Right, and that parking lot doesn't have a building you drop them off at. It doesn't have a phone. It doesn't have any of that, does it?
So I don't know what the logistics at the building were. I would imagine it would have needed to have a phone because you have to be able to call your lawyer. So
Well, I can tell you it didn't. So, and these people driven out there, they were already told they weren't charged, and they weren't being charged, they were being released. But they were driven and forced outside of Ottawa or in the outer skirts and dropped off in the snow. Now, are you aware this happened, yes or no?
no, I'm not aware, and it wasn't outside of Ottawa. It was still within the geographical boundaries of the city of Ottawa.
In your evidence in chief, you kept using the word violence regarding protesters, right?
Yes.
All right, and you've heard the evidence of Superintendent Morris already. You sort of touched on that, and he had stated that the lack of violence in Ottawa during the protest was actually shocking.
So I don't recall that statement.
All right. So is it fair to say that when you use the phrase violence, you're not actually describing any form of physical assaults, are you?
Well, physical assaults do contribute to what I'm describing. I was specifically describing the violence that our community felt as a result of the culmination of actions that the occupiers engaged in.
So the violence that they felt, not actual violence, is that what you're saying?
That is correct. Not the criminal code definition of violence, but the violence that they felt by having incessant horns blared.
Right, and
by
not-
having trucks run 24/7 a day.
Right.
By having people intimidate them and follow them, and by having people rip masks off their head, by feeling sheltered in their homes.
Well,
where they couldn't leave.
thank you. I understand what you mean. But you're not talking about violence under Section 2 of the CSIS Act, are you?
No, I'm not.
Thanks.
As I defined violence, it wasn't strictly criminal code violence, and I'm happy to again go through the definition that I was using when I was talking about community violence. This is a part of it. Threats, charges under the criminal code was a part of it, but it was the trauma that the community felt. It was the extreme circumstances that they were exposed to and the duration of time that they were exposed to that has very clearly been described to me by community members as violence inflicted on them and towards them.
And so that's the honking, right? Is one of them.
Honking would be one of them.
The, I believe the exhaust coming from trucks.
But I think it's important you put it in context. It's the honking of large air horns
Right.
of approximately 300 to 400 to 500 trucks simultaneously for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's not just tooting a little horn. It's the incessant noise pollution that is being inflicted on the people that we were referring to. The Emergency Act created a very stable platform, a stable environment for us to execute our plan.
But last question, just because I just want to get this clear. But so you're saying that there was existing laws that you could have done the same thing under. Is that right?
We had a plan. We were going to execute a plan.
Thank you.
In the absence of the invocation of the Emergencies Act, the OPS would have been able to clear the protests.
In the absence of the invocation of the Emergencies Act, the OPS, the OPP, the RCMP, as part of Unified Command, were going to clear the protests.
We've rented a giant Airbnb right next to the Trucker Commission of Inquiry. For the whole 6 weeks, we are going to staff it with Rebel News journalists. We're taking shifts. 15 of our reporters are going to cycle through this Ottawa studio, and we are going to cover the Trucker Commission of Inquiry as carefully and comprehensively as we cover the convoy itself. But I need your help. Please go to truckercommission.com to help me cover the extraordinary costs of this important journalistic mission. Thank you.